Welcome to our first Talk Growth to Me event hosted by Omniki. Today we're gathered here to foster a community of creators focused on growth. I'd first like to thank my friend Rick for helping make this event happen. This all started with a cold email from him to Sahil asking whether he'd like to come from Utah to come speak with us for this event, and thankfully Sahil said yes. So thank you, Sahil, and thank you all for being here today. Omniki, the company that's hosting this event, is a company that empowers creatives with AI. We provide predictions, suggestions, and insights to help creators design personalized experiences at scale. And so you can check us out at omniki.com. Today we're joined by Sahil and Brianne. Sahil is the founder and CEO of Gumroad. Gumroad helps creators make a living doing what they love. They've sent over $199 million to artists, designers, educators, and more. And before that, he was the second employee at Pinterest. Brianne is a top investor and advisor and growth expert. Business Insider called her one of the top investors for startups to know. And before that, she ran growth at Expedia and Zendesk. So with that, please give a warm welcome to Brianne and Sahil.
All right, thanks so much for having us. And I'm super excited. This is my first time speaking in this space, and I love what The Laundry has built. I think this is such a good environment to have a creative discussion. Super excited to have you here in the Bay Area. Longtime follower, big fan. For those of you who don't follow Sahil on Twitter, he's great. Sharing really honest perspective on what it's like to be a startup founder. He most recently wrote a really impressive blog post on the Gumroad journey. So we're going to spend some time tonight both dissecting the Gumroad journey and also talking about, the path ahead, which will hopefully be an inspiration to everyone here. We had a chance to talk to some of you earlier. It's a good mix of founders, creators, people who are building things on the side, which is something that we're both incredibly passionate about. So we'll make sure to leave some time for Q&A at the end. Want to make sure this is a really honest, creative discussion and really want to go deep with you guys on what you're currently building. So thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me. I'm Sahil. Do I have to intro myself? I don't know why I'm doing this.
I don't think so.
I'm good.
Let's talk about, I think it'd be helpful just to kind of set the tone on Gumroad. How did you come up with the idea? I remember very famously you had tweeted before it actually went live. So I feel like, throughout your entire journey, you've done a really great job of being very transparent and being really honest with yourself and honest with your employees. So I'd love to just kind of talk about what was the inspiration for Gumroad and what were the early days like?
Yeah, so the inspiration for Gumroad was I had designed this pencil icon in Photoshop over 4 hours or something like that. It's Friday night while I was, home from work at Pinterest, and I wanted to sell it to my audience. I had, 2,000 or 3,000 followers on Twitter and Dribble and stuff like that, and I was like, this can't be that difficult, if I wanted to share it, like Dropbox, if I wanted to, create a storefront, Shopify, or all of these different ways that you can sell content, these marketplaces that exist. But if I wanted to do what I sort of thought about, about it like a lemonade stand, basically. Like, I don't need a storefront. I just want to test this thing out and then see if there's traction, and then I can sort of do all the other stuff. And there just wasn't really a way to do that. And so I thought about Bitly and how they sort of redirected, you go to one URL and you put in another place. And I just like that metaphor a lot. And so I just was like, okay, Bitly plus credit card form equals what I want to build. And so that weekend, Saturday, Sunday, I built Gumroad. And I asked a friend of mine, John from Stripe, if I could use Stripe. Without it, I probably wouldn't have been a weekend project. It probably would have been a 3-month-long project, which is less sexy. So thanks, John. I think we're like users number 40 or something of Stripe. And launched it Monday morning, built the whole thing. Just a pretty simple app, CRUD app with a credit card form. Launched it Monday morning, posted it on Hacker News. Growth tip number 2. Told all my friends to upvote it on Hacker News, as you should if you're posting stuff on Hacker News, because that's what everybody does. And got to the top. It's just kind of like rolling a boulder up the hill. You get it far enough, and then it goes and does its thing. And so it ended up doing really well. It was on the front page, 400 upvotes or something. 50,000 people saw it, and it was cool, and nothing happened after that. and I went back to work, and it was kind of weird at work because I just launched this thing. And it just kind of kept in my head. It was like, I'd build stuff all the time and nothing stuck, haha, gum. Thank you. It'll get better. But it was the thing where there's this thing that happens where like you can't get an idea out of your head, and every time you meet with someone, everything they say is like filtered through that lens of like helping creators do something really easily. And I'm like, oh yeah, it would be so cool if Gumroad existed. If you knew about it, it would solve it. And I kept thinking that like for weeks and weeks and weeks and months after that. And so at some point I was like, I need to go do this. And so that's when I left Pinterest, raised a bunch of money, and the rest is history.
Let's take a couple steps back. So one thing that's really interesting is you were very early at Pinterest.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels like creatives have always been a part of your story.
Yeah.
So at what point was it like growing up, you were creative? Like, did you come from a creative family? What inspired you to join Pinterest in the first place?
Yeah, not creative at all. No creative family, which I think was probably part of it. Is like I saw, like, so I grew up in Singapore, like relatively affluent, though my parents didn't. And everyone was like getting into, banking and finance and making money and law and sort of med school and all that. So that was sort of what everyone wanted to do. And I just like, I still to this day don't know what my dad does. Like, I just can't get it out of him. I don't know if he does anything. He worked for a bank and like, just don't know what any of those people do.
Quick question to the audience. How many people know what their dad does for a living?
I mean, more than
cool.
their title,
So
like
most
day to
people-
day? Day to day, really?
Yeah.
We don't have a good relationship, I guess. Anyways, yeah, I just felt like I had started like messing around with like Photoshop and design, really because like friends of mine were like getting into it, and I just was like, that's cool. And there was like Photoshop on all the school computers and stuff, and so I started messing around with that, following like tutorials on blogs and started doing freelance work, and that sort of just evolved really naturally. Someone's like, oh, I know someone who like can design websites for you, and it's this kid, and I charged them like $50 or something and design like a website, and then they'd be like, oh yeah, he can code it too, and I'm like, I can code it too, and then I would learn how to code and sort of do the HTML, CSS and stuff, and that part happened organically. And then in parallel, I think I saw all my friends like just focus on this money thing, and seeing like how like the personality of my dad that I did not like that much, that part of it. And it's different, right? Like there is a sacrifice that he made so that I could do what I do. And I really respect and appreciate that. But I just did not want to do that myself, and I started getting into tech more and more, and the App Store came out, and that was all about empowering creators to make stuff and deal with all the payment side and things. And a lot of this, like in hindsight, makes more sense, I think, than me just doing it. It was very reactive for me. But I started making, I was designing, I could code a little bit of HTML, CSS, and the iOS App Store had just come out, and Stanford had a course on iTunes University, and so I learned how to do iOS development through that course in a couple weeks, which is, it's still up there, I think, that resource, and it's amazing, and it's free, and started making my own apps, which are basically like, UI, like you're not really, I didn't know what a database was or anything like that, but I knew I could like make this button, and you click this button, and this would happen, and I built a bunch of apps, put them in the App Store. I built an app called Taxi Law that allowed you to call a cab with your phone. And I never considered myself a creator, or even like a designer. I remember like having some meeting with someone sometime, and they're like, what do you do? I'm like, I'm a designer. And it was like, what is that? And it was like, that's weird. Don't girls design stuff? Like, And I was like, oh yeah, I guess that is kind of like a feminine-ish word in our culture. Anyways, I just really, it happened organically. And then I started making more and more money on the apps, and eventually I was just like, I can do this, I can not even make apps full time, but just like coding for a company full time. That's a possibility for me. And like literally no people from my high school went into startups, zero, or computer science. Like I think one person went into computer science with like the goal of going to like Google or something. I was the only person. I remember moving to San Francisco, and I was like the only person from my high school of like, 1,000 people in San Francisco. Like nobody came out here. It was all New York. And yeah, and sort of that happened organically over time.
Do you feel like growing up in Singapore and having that exposure to the financial world helped like both of those worlds converge, where it's like you were learning like creative skill sets and you were interested in that, but long term you ended up landing on tools to help creators make more money?
I think so. Yeah, I think there's definitely a correlation. And I think, it would sort of be remiss of me to say that I don't care about money and impact and these things that like the finance industry has and does. And, like Bill Gates is like one of my sort of all-time heroes. And I remember a quote from him that's like something like, don't bully the nerds. They're going to be your boss one day or something like that. Him or Abe Lincoln said that. And I think he just like, at the end of the day, like you could start to see already at that point, this is like still like sort of like, I mean, Facebook was there and was growing, but like there was clearly this trend that the people in power were currently the finance people. And then 2008 happened and the new cool people were the tech people, and that was already sort of a trend that was happening. The iPhone, Steve Jobs, like that whole mythos was being built. And so I think a lot of that attracted me, regardless of where I was at the time, but definitely like like being the contrarian, I guess, being like, I'm the person who's not going to get into finance or banking or anything like that. I think what probably was a large part of why I got into it. And a lot of it is like that. When I look at why I got started in design, it was like my friends were designing different like things for video games. And I was like, I can do that better, and my brother I remember one time my mom asked my brother for help with the internet. And I was so offended. I was like, it turns out he's doing Android at Google, so I can still barely code. But yeah, I'm just like way too incentivized by like external forces, I think, in hindsight. And luckily they've guided me like in a good way. I think I use competition in like hopefully healthy way, but yeah, it is weird to talk about and think about.
Yeah, it's cool. So let's fast forward. So you've built Gumroad.
Mm-hmm.
You have an MVP live. So easy. You chose to raise venture capital.
Mm-hmm.
How much did you raise? Who did you raise from? What was that process like?
Yeah, so I left Pinterest and raised $1.1 million seed round, and that was like sort of a party round. Really popular at the time. Excel put in $400K, and then first round collaborative fund, SV Angel, Chris Sacca with lowercase, Naval Ravikant, Max Levchin, co-founder of PayPal, Seth Goldstein, Danny Reimer from Index, maybe one or two people I forgot. Put in 1.1 million, and then basically like 3 months later, I raised a Series A from Kleiner Perkins for $7 million. Mike Abbott from there joined the board, and it was just me at the time still.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah.
So MVP is
Still
live.
is, actually.
How
It's
many
weird.
users did you have at Series A?
Like 0.
Okay.
Yeah, Josh Koppelman, one of my investors, he's awesome, super great guy, and he has this sort of pretty famous quote that he says like, "There's nothing like numbers to fuck up a good story," and so I remember calling him when I had the term sheet from Kleiner, and I met with Index. I told Danny, I'm like, "Hey, I have a term sheet from Kleiner," and he's like, "Cool, just like come in tomorrow, pitch the partnership, we'll get you a term sheet too." And I was like, "Cool," so I got a term sheet from Index. So the term sheet from Kleiner was 7 on 28 post, and then so 25% dilution, and then the term sheet from Index was 4, so not as much money, but on a 22 post, I think, so like way less dilution. And I just called Josh. I was like, should I do any of these things? Should I spend more time meeting with people? And he's like, honestly, if you're already spending way too much time thinking about raising money. You don't need it. Like, you literally have no people working for you yet. But if it's like there's nothing like numbers to fuck up a good story, and you don't have numbers right now. And fast forward, sort of comes into play later. But at that time, he was just like, look, if you can get the money and you think it's a good deal, and there's no one telling you like, just, there's no reason really not to, frankly, because like if basically you're going to have to raise this money in a year. Mm-hmm. Do you think you're going to be in a better, like there's like a 30% chance it's going to be a 200x valuation, 200% valuation, 2x valuation. there's a 70% chance you're not going to be able to raise money at all, or whatever
that makes sense.
the math is.
So
Anyways,
I think like maybe taking a step back for those
Yeah.
who are new to the Bay Area, for those who are going to watch this later online. What year was that?
So that was late 2011, early 2012 is when I raised
So
that
the
money.
market was a little bit different than it was today. Like the pre-traction, pre-launch team bet Series A. Was
Yeah.
that as common as it is today?
No, it was, I mean, I remember raising that Series A, and it was like, my ego, I was like, who else has done this, And it was like basically nobody. And like, who else has raised a team, like a team of investors of this caliber? Nobody, basically. I mean, now it's way more common, and there's like way more money out there, and so like a $7 million Series A is nothing. But I remember back then there was one startup that had raised more than that in a Series A. Not that I recommend doing any of that. I'm just sharing with you what I did. And the reason, this is sort of the question that a lot of people ask, like, how did that happen? Like, how did that happen so quickly? And like, it's one of those things where, in my essay, I talk about the product, and I say, there's this line, it doesn't matter how, amazing your team is or how fast you ship features, like the market is going to determine most of your growth. And this basically, I think, goes to the same with raising money in the sense that like the market is still the most important thing. You can't really trick yourself into raising a bunch of money. There is a term, people say like, oh, he's a really good fundraiser about certain founders. And I've talked to people that are called good fundraisers. I met one today, and he's like, I don't know what that means. Like, I raised a lot of money, but like we had all these buzzwords, this great team, and like, the market wanted this so badly. And when you talk to founders that do raise rounds like this, and especially when they happen preemptively, like it happened with me, it's because the investors wanted to put money in. The sharks were in the water, and they were like, come in with us. It'll be fun. And, you're like, yeah, of course, and that sounds awesome. I was 19 at the time, I think, like $7 million, $8 million, no team. Like, even if all of this like hits the fan, I still did that. Like, I still did something that, for better or worse, like I will always be, a Series A funded founder. I raised money from these people.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that's the best reason to do it, but at the time that was a big part. I was a nobody. I moved to San Francisco, or the Bay Area at least, like a year before that, a year and a half before that. I was in school. I was in high school 2 years before that. You know, so it was like hard not to say yes to that.
It's pretty interesting to think about, like, kind of putting a little context around like the definition of creators, because I think today it feels a lot more obvious because we see influencers on YouTube, we see like how Instagram has matured, podcasts, like there's all these new categories and definitions of creators that have quickly evolved in, say, even the last three to 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
What did the creator landscape look like when you first started building Gumroad?
Yeah, totally. And just to put a point on the last thing, the reason I could raise money, if you want to go replicate it, I was the second employee at Pinterest. I can design, I can code. I'm relatively personable. If you have those things and you dress like me and you talk like a founder, the pattern matching thing goes off in the VC's heads. And if you can do that, your variation of that, you will have a very easy time raising money. I'm a dude, that helps too. But the creative landscape looked totally different. I remember like we had to figure out what we were calling our users. Jack Dorsey has this famous little Tumblr post, I think, that's like, we don't call our users because that's rude or something like that. We call them customers. It was mind-boggling to me at the time. But we wanted to do the same thing. I don't want to call our users are like people that do drugs. They're drug users. Everyone else is like a customer or whatever. But seriously, like we really wanted to think about like, how did the people that wanted to use this sort of thing define themselves? So what was their identity? And I did, a lot of research, and there were only really 2 companies that used the word creator at the time. It was YouTube, called their YouTubers creators, and Kickstarter called them creators. And to me, Kickstarter was like the closest sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But I just really liked the idea that these people wanted to create, and they were using Gumroad to make money, yes, but to make money so that they could create. But the ultimate thing that they wanted to do, the means was making money, right? But the ends was to be creative, to make stuff. And I just liked that a lot. And so I really hesitated within the company. Anytime it was like, I'm a customer, I'm a merchant, I'm a seller. I was like, we changed all the internal code. We were like, these are creators, we tried our best. Obviously technical debt, but Yeah, they're creators. And now it's awesome, I think, because now you say creators. And we had a hard time because we'd say creators and people would be like, what? Like, what are they creating, though? Like, oh, video. They're like, why don't you call them filmmaker? You know, it's like, well, we also do other stuff.
Right.
And they do other stuff, too. And they, like, write. And it's like this weird sort of ambiguous thing. And now it's awesome. Because
this feels like it was a little bit pre-side hustle as well. Like people were
Yeah.
not making as much in their free time, or they weren't, learning to code or learning to design on the weekends.
Yeah, I think the closest word that people used at the time was like a polymath or something, something that implied that they had like other skills. But I like the word creator because it sort of, one, it's about producing things. And then two, it sort of, at least now, it sort of comes baked in with like the seriousness of it. You're not just like learning math for fun. You like want to do something with this thing. You want to make something that doesn't exist, that exists outside of your body. That will exist when you die. And that was a big part of it to me. One of the reasons I got into making software was this idea that it was like going to be my legacy, that I would die and then the stuff that I had built, the stuff that I had written, all the products that I had made would continue and have impact and create value. And like when you think about the people that you remember, a lot of them are artists or creators of different sorts, Renaissance men, et cetera. And so when I realized that our users were me, that I was a creator and that I was just building, that was just like, aha moment.
I think so. For the early stage founders in the room, did you find that early positioning was helpful, or was there some education that you had to do with creators themselves? Like, did someone at the time identify as being a creator?
Not really, unfortunately, because it was so associated with Kickstarter actually at the time that people were like, "I'm not a creator." I'm like, they kind of owned that. Like YouTubers just called themselves YouTubers, so like they didn't actually use the word that YouTube wanted them to. But we definitely had to educate, and we really struggled in the early days. And this is totally like, I'm not sure what would have happened if we said we're not for creators, we're just for a specific vertical, and like kind of Amazon style, right? Start with books and then go broader. I think I like the direction that we chose, but it definitely would have made the beginning easier because we had the homepage, and we basically had to have like 4 homepages within the homepage. That was like, if you're a musician, boom. If you're a filmmaker, boom. If you're a software developer, et cetera. And it was really, really tricky because the reason we wanted to build for creators is we're like, you're all doing the same thing. Like you're using different nouns, right? You're saying book instead of film. But you're doing the same sort of thing. You're going for the same goal. You're going to use roughly the same software to go do that. But when people see that, they think you're building for none of us. Like you're building a subpar solution for all of us versus a really great solution for one of us. And we're going to go find. And we were able to overcome that. And I actually think our software is better because we're thinking about a broader sort of system. And I think it's going to pay off and pay off even more over time. But yeah, it was definitely a hurdle.
How did you think about like early growth mechanics in the product? Did you think about referrals and like creators knowing other types of creators, or how did you get to say even like your first 1,000 users?
Yeah. So I definitely like when I decide what I want to build, it needs to include a sort of a fundamental part of it needs to be people that use the product will benefit from other people that they know using the product. Pinterest does this. Some other stuff I've built does this. Gumroad, you can't, there's no audience. I mean, if you don't share it, you're not going to make any money. And so, and part of it was like, I don't know if I'm capable of doing that. I know I can kind of build and ship product, but I have no idea if I can do any of this other stuff. And so that's like the key to me. That's like, if it's not fundamentally important, if like there's no actual value, everything you're doing is artificial, right? You're going to artificially incentivize referrals and all this sort of stuff. But the true sort of sustainable, scalable growth is going to be word of mouth of some degree. But so it was that. But then it was also just especially getting to the first 1,000 users, it's all just manual stuff. Cold emails, for example, are really like I think it's I don't know if people don't talk about it or it's so boring that stuff doesn't go viral on Twitter or something. But like cold emails really, really, really work. And when no one knows who you are, and when you're like a 3-month-old startup, no one is gonna like sort of be like, I need to sell something. Google. Okay, Gumroad. We're not going to be in the homepage at that point anyway, on the front page anyways. Okay, cool. Gumroad. Okay, they've existed since like, 3 months ago. Cool. Yeah, I'm going to give them all my bank account information and credit cards and stuff and like upload all these files and like and tell my million people that follow me on YouTube or whatever about this thing. It just doesn't happen. There needs to be so much social proof behind something before someone is like going to do something different. People are so risk averse, right? You go to the grocery store and you buy the same like brand of blank XYZ Coke, and if you saw something next to it, there could be a chance that it's way better, cheaper, healthier, whatever, but you just don't do it. Just like humans are like, you just get into these loops, which I think is it's good. I mean, you'd go crazy if you're trying to like sort of reevaluate every decision. But when you're a startup, like you just have to keep that in mind. Like no one cares about using your startup and making you successful and being, I don't know, cool and hip or whatever. You have to just literally go out and for that first batch, and even like 2 or 3 years in, the vast majority, like 80% of our volume was driven by or sourced people that me and my team would reach out to, all emails basically, some scripts and stuff to try to compile these lists. But at the end of the day, even the scripts don't really work because each one has to be so custom and specific. That was just better to like find someone specific and spend a lot of time trying to get them on board. And then just sort of count wise, if you look at just the number of creators that were that came in inbound versus outbound, the numbers were there in terms of people coming in. But if you look at the revenue and the GMV, et cetera, all of that is sales driven because, Eminem doing an album launch on Gumroad, makes $2 million in 2 days. It's going to take a lot of independent content creators that stumbled upon this thing, self-serve, got all the way through all the steps and sold a product, got paid, all that sort of stuff. It took years. Now it's, sort of reversed. Vast majority of the volume is self-serve, but it takes a lot longer, than a lot of people think. And we're SaaS. SaaS in general takes a long period of time. We're self-serve, so that makes it worse. And then we're building for creators, and many creators like hate talking about money, thinking about money. They want to go create stuff. So it's just like all these things that just made it super difficult.
Were there certain types of creators that would convert at a faster rate, like ones that were more technically inclined that could go through the full self-serve experience?
Yeah, it's really weird. So one of the reasons we built Gumroad is like I was able to build Gumroad. I'm technical, right? But Gumroad is great for if you're a creator, but you're not a technical creator. So we're not going to go after like technical creators. By far the biggest vertical for us in the early days. Turns out like the whole no code movement I think is like really applicable to people that code actually. And I think that's partly because like it's not necessarily about like you can now do something you can't do before. It's just faster, easier, cheaper. You're paying someone else to worry about that thing for you that you would have to worry about. And even today, some of our largest people could build competitors or build their own versions in-house. And some people have gone out and done that. But we have someone who makes $330,000 a month. And I'm like, why do you pay us money?
That's an interesting point. Like I'm an investor in VoiceFlow and Webflow. Both are low code. One is for building Alexa skills. The other is for building websites. And it's interesting to see while a lot of the low code movement, their individual makers are more like self-serve, like side hustlers that are talking about it.
Yeah.
The deeper need and the core use case that we're seeing more organically is enterprise companies. You're like Fortune 500s who see the value in the software layer and the automation because historically they've had massive teams and they either want to like downsize the team or they just want to accelerate their time to launch. Did you see that with certain types of creators and was there like a certain size and scale where you were able to solve a need faster?
Yeah. So, I think that's spot on. I think in general, and I think one of the reasons is that startups and software companies are, one, they're more okay. Like they know what a startup is. They're okay with like the sort of the immaturity of the business and product. So I think they're like more forgiving of some of that stuff. And then they're just in general more aware of other startups and stuff like that. But yeah, I think in terms of the scale, like in general, like unfortunately, like the very low volume people were like the easiest people to get on the system. Super low risk. One of the features that we launched pretty early was a pay what you want feature. So you could say it's 0+, and that was an amazing tool for growth because we could just tell people like, hey, like if you're not comfortable selling a product, that's like a big commitment. Just take a thing that you made and instead of like giving it away for free, just like 0+, like people can pay, donate if they want. And that was a great way to get people to at least get through the onboarding and all that sort of stuff and like have success, make $15 or something like that. And it's really that first sale, like for, the sort of for WordPress, they said it was the first comment on the blog post, on their first blog post, which is why they have like the default comment. from like Mr. WordPress or whoever. But it's like figuring out what that is for people. And for us, and especially anecdotally, like the data is a little bit trickier. Like it doesn't really show that as clearly. But speaking to people, which matters a lot, I found is they always like they remember that moment. You know, they're like, oh yeah, I was like in this room at this time and this happened. You know, I got that email from Gumroad that I made my first sale or whatever, and that's when it starts. Like just like with me and iPhone apps, it was like that moment where I was like, someone bought this thing. I have no idea who they are. They just gave me $199 minus 30%, and it was such a cool feeling, you know. That sort of the asynchronous model of that was just so captivating to me.
For some of the early stage founders in the room who have a primarily self-serve product, how do you recommend user research and getting some of that anecdotal feedback?
Yeah. I mean, this is why I kind of recommend that people build stuff for themselves, because you want to be your first user. Your feedback loop is basically instantaneous because you're building it for you. And then get your friends and family on board as soon as you can if they're potential users. I mean, this is what we did at Pinterest and stuff. It was really fascinating. I was talking to a Gumroad creator about this, and you know, I was talking to him about how he got his first whatever, you know, how he hit certain milestones. He was like, oh yeah, those were my family. And I was like, oh, who came after that? Like all my friends. And like, who came after that? Like, oh yeah, like my extended. And it's like, it took so many layers to get to like, you know, my Facebook friends from college and stuff. And I was like, and I never heard that before, you know?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, what else did you expect me to say? Like, who of all the people in the world who are going to support me first, like the people that have the most trust in me, I'm like a nobody on the internet right now, you know? And so like sometimes like you kind of like look, you miss the obvious places, you know? So start with those people, start with the people that somehow found your thing and are using it, and just like be like, I'm just going to call you once a week and I want to show you what we're working on and get your feedback. And you don't have to do it a ton, but like that marginal utility you get from it like is amazing at the beginning. Like you can like literally just for every feature, just have one Zoom call and show it to them, and you will make every single feature you launch like 30% better. Like you'll just change some copy and maybe add an image or a how-to, and it's just going to massively help. But really just like find the community, like find so many people, I think because of the scale of networks like Twitter and YouTube and things like that, Instagram, like there's so much of an emphasis on like, oh, like I'm going to build my audience by being on Twitter or whatever. And it just doesn't really happen.
Right.
Twitter is an amazing, like it's just, networks to me are like multiplier effects. So like once you're interesting in a community, you're legitimate. Typically a lot of that happens in person. Then you can like sort of try to scale it using one of these things. But at the beginning, it's like super unsexy. It's like, okay, where do creators hang out? You know, where do they spend their time? Probably some subreddit somewhere. I always tell creators like it's cool because I get to have this conversation a lot with creators because they're trying to do the same thing. And I'm like, yeah, what's the subreddit? What's like the Facebook group for this? And they're like, I don't know. And they're like, I'm like, but that's where they are. I mean, if you want to learn how to woodwork, there's a subreddit.
Yep. There's
multiple Facebook groups. At least one probably has like 80,000 people in it, you know? Like, don't go in there and just like try selling your products, but like be part of the community, you know? You know, someone asked me how, like, why did this article that you wrote blow up? And like, the easy answer is like, it was good. People shared it or whatever. But like, I think a lot of it is like 8 years of relationship building, you know?
Right.
And so like, I remember in the first, I don't know, 1 or 2 minutes, I tweeted it, and you know, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes in or something, I had like 80 retweets or something. I don't know. It was like a lot. It was a lot more than I was expecting. I was like, okay, this is probably gonna be cool, but it was because no one had read it in that time. I mean, probably maybe the 40 people that I had. That's another thing, right? I asked all these people for feedback.
Yeah.
So they're sort of like in the system. They're gonna, you know, share it. They've already read the thing. But there's at least a bunch more people that I guarantee you hit retweet and then read the article.
Yep.
And you need that to do that, you know.
I think community as a platform to launch something is really important. I think that's something we're seeing a lot more with, you know, post product hunt, like the ability to actually like create and build a relevant community around you actually serves as a really good platform for launching a startup.
Totally. And community, the way I define community is everyone knows each other.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's like the great thing about that is that you can be new, you can be smart, but you can comment on Hacker News and everyone sees your comment. It's not like tiny font size because you joined yesterday or something like that, which it would be, Twitter, same, Twitter doesn't technically do stuff like that, but they prioritize, things that do well. So like if you have a bunch of followers, like, yeah, you're going to get into all the whatever the algorithms, they're going to love you, and then you do super well. On Twitter, I know this because I will go through and tweet something from like 6 years ago that I thought was really funny that I tweeted.
Yeah.
And it does really well, turns out, like 300 times better. It's literally copy pasted. And growth gem number, whatever we're on. Yeah, I think you need to build that trust. What it is trust. It's like this idea, hitting retweet before reading the article, like getting people to share. There's so much that think about how often you share stuff, I think, or let me just say about me. Like, I don't share stuff that much. Like, a song has to be so profoundly good for me to be like, I'm going to go copy paste this link from Spotify and like open up Messenger and then send it to this one person that I've thought of when I listen to this song. It just doesn't happen that much. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't have those relationships and that trust, like if you're a musician and you get your friends, your family to listen and share, like if you're afraid of that, so is everybody else, Yeah. Like that's not, you can be afraid. And, I was afraid when I hit publish, but I hit publish, I'm afraid every time I tweet, I have to like tweet and then turn off my phone and take a shower most of the time. But if I'm not using Buffer, so I can even, think about it, like I tweet it when I'm asleep or something.
Are you using Buffer? Is that another?
I use TweetDeck.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, but basically they have a buffer feature built in, not for threading though. So like that's the really annoying one, because all my threads I have to do it myself.
You're manually tweet storming and maybe using TweetDeck. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. That's another tip.
Yeah, TweetDeck is so good.
It's interesting because I think one thing, thinking about building early stage SaaS companies, one thing that I think is really interesting is when you talk to the most recent YC batches. On the consumer side, entrepreneurs will say, wow, YC is getting so big, and it's with a negative sort of tone. Mm-hmm. When you talk to early stage B2B entrepreneurs that are going through YC, 150 companies in each batch is great because now you have a community of companies that you can sell to.
Totally. I mean, Stripe's whole model was like, we'll just get this class of YC, and then we'll get the next class of YC, and then we'll get the next class of YC, and everyone's like, oh, I don't know if you can really build a business like only on startups. And then like 5 to 10 years later, like every, Zoom, Slack, et cetera, like clearly it is a market.
Yeah. I mean, I remember like early stage of Zendesk, Zendesk was started 10 years ago, same time as Uber, same time as Airbnb. You have a company like Uber that starts out on $9 MRR, self-serve only. And you have like early founding team would be the ones like logging in, doing like responding to Zendesk tickets. Mm-hmm. We see that today even with, I was talking to the CEO of Instacart recently, and he's like, I still have like the Zendesk is in my name. And like, as we've scaled, I just still like, have access to the platform. I can log in, I can answer tickets. And it still is fairly self-serve even as you like scale up into a much larger company.
There's so much duct tape and like things that you just, I don't know why. I remember like when I was a kid, I would think that like startups were built by like with supercomputers. Like I just imagine in my head like these like walls that like these massive things that just went up straight like a power wall or something, but bigger. And people would like, that's where you would code, right? Because you couldn't code on like a laptop that's like not powerful enough or something. And when you start doing all this stuff, you're like, this is all, there are no secrets. And they're doing kind of the same thing that I'm doing, but just like they have more throughput on what they're doing. There's just as much duct tape. There's just as many bugs. Mm-hmm. I remember someone, Stripe has all these amazing marketing pages, and it's just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It's just a static. There's no tricks behind this. There was a really great video about some movie sequences that were just amazing, and then you see like sort of the behind the scenes, and it's just like it's amazing because you're like that must have cost so much money, and it must have taken so much time. And then you like watch the how-to and you're like, oh yeah, it did. Like there was just no tricks. It actually just like they built a whole freaking set to do this one little thing for 2 seconds. But that's why the movie's so damn good, is because they did that, And like very rare, like almost always, it's just a lot of people, a lot of time, a lot of effort, to a point where you just don't believe it anymore. And like to me, there's that quote about like technology's, indistinguishable from magic, like sort of good enough technology or whatever. And to me, it's just like things people work on for a long period of time, just way too more than most people would ever believe is what magic really is in most cases.
Do you find with creators as a category or as a segment that you're selling software to, are there compounding returns and like different ways that they start using the Gumroad product and how it evolves like as they grow into their skill or as they start, acquiring more followers on their side? Like how do you think about like the evolution of a creator?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it we still need to do. Like we're still building a lot of this stuff out 8 years later. But it does. I mean, the use case and the consumer behavior changes, and we like just haven't reacted fast enough to it. Like we'll launch a Patreon competitor this year and things like that to react to it a little bit more. But just in general, like I think it's important to think about a startup and every feature you design as like how does this work when you're starting out? How does this work when you're sort of intermediate, advanced, etc. Like with Gumroad, it's like you don't have to sell a product. You can just like have a follow form, collect emails, because you need to do that before you do anything else. Yeah. You got to build an audience. Then you have you can do the pay what you want stuff. Then you can do a $1 product. Then you can have a storefront of products, and then you can build out your workflows and your email marketing. And, this guy, has $330,000 a month going through it, almost as much revenue as Gumroad does, and it's cool. I love that part of it. Like I love the idea that like someone using the same piece of software and it's just as simple can go out and do something at that crazy scale. And I remember learning that from Ben at Pinterest, like the CEO. He told me, I think we were like debating like some feature that we should build or not or whatever. And the way he pitched to me is like this feature every feature we build has to be so critical that it will like be part of the marketing collateral. Like, because every single person that uses Pinterest has to now learn about this new thing. It's like whenever you see like Burger King roll out a new burger, that thing has to be taught to like so many people. It's like profound, I think, it's like a big deal when like the Szechuan sauce comes back or whatever. And just this is how you open it. But yeah, no, it just really struck me because it was like, yeah, every time you talk to everything, it's so easy to build. It's so easy to think that the answer to this is that you just need to build more and more and more. But I think a lot of it is like, you need to rethink and realign and like talk to creators and take a lot of the stuff that you already have and just make it better, do it better, go deeper.
How did you think about productizing some of those insights? Because I think one thing that's really interesting with a platform like Pinterest is the sophisticated push notifications and social cues and things that come when other people use the product. Like I receive an email every time, someone that I follow pins something, or every time there's like a shared interaction, or there's just so much like social signals built into the product itself.
Yeah.
How have you thought about like when you get an insight from a creator, like are there things that you can productize, or are there things that you say, no, let's like hold off, we have a fairly lean team. How do you think about prioritizing like certain feature requests and, especially around like social signals and ways to build virality into the product?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, with Gumroad, it's been really hard because we found we tried to like growth hack our way to a Series B, didn't work, and a lot of that was because it was so difficult because we weren't in charge of our GMV, which correlates with our revenue. Our creators are in charge of our GMV, and if they don't sell anything, we don't make any money, which can be a really great thing. It creates this phenomenal alignment, but it means like all we can do is like teach creators and hope that they do the things, and make money because we can't artificially inflate that. Whereas with Pinterest, it was kind of a different story because you can do things that will get people to pin more. Yeah. It's hard to be like, hey, we shipped this thing and now people are selling 20% faster. It just doesn't happen as much. Yeah. Beyond the basic stuff like A/B testing the credit card form and things like that. At Pinterest, it was a little bit different. But I'll use an insight from a product that I've never worked on because I think it is like, to me, it sums up so much of it. It was Kevin from Instagram. I was having dinner with Kevin from Instagram, and I asked him, I was like, what, like in the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years they were working on it or something at the time, like what worked? Like of all the things that Instagram is a pretty simple app. Like what, clearly very successful. Like what happened? Like what did you try? What failed? And he was like, like fixing bugs, performance improvements, like speed. And I was like, and he was like, that's it. Like every experiment almost like, I mean, this is what he told me. He was like, those things. Like nothing else really worked. Because when you think about, I don't know, a tool like Instagram or Pinterest or anything like that, it's like, it's sort of the premise is simple. It's like, I want to look at a stream of photos and then I want to consume a stream of photos. And I think, obviously like there's a team there, they're doing stuff. It's not like they're just like sitting around or something like that, like Boomerang. There's like a bunch of features and they're really awesome, but they all fit into that. When Ben talked about, can we communicate this as part of the thing that we do really simply? With Instagram, I think you can, right? All of these lenses and different things fit into that. But they don't do reposting. They don't do a lot of these things, groups. They don't do any of this stuff because it doesn't fit into that yet. And you can over time. I think they can adapt and change their strategy. But I people always make fun of the app updates that are like bug fixes and performance improvements. It's sort of like a meme at this point. But truly, those are the things that matter.
Yeah.
If I think most of the people in this room that use Slack would say speed, performance improvements, bug fixes. Like, sure, a lot of this other stuff would be nice, but at the end of the day, the stuff that's going to fundamentally change your usage of Slack has already been built. It was built a long time ago. I remember when I started Gumroad, I was like, all these startups ship so slowly, and we're going to ship so freaking fast. It's going to be dope. And and it turns out, like, and really, like, you think about what was the last feature Pinterest launched? Instagram, Quora, Facebook. I'm not saying they don't launch stuff. They do, but they take an incredible amount of time. They make it really fit into what they're doing, and it fits into the core. It's not like, oh, we're building all this side stuff. They have. Facebook has tried that a bunch of times. Typically, it doesn't work. I would say that, post my conversation with Kevin, I would say that Instagram Stories has worked, but to me, it fits into the core thing, and it is a core thing. They treat it as a core part of the experience. And I think if I could go back in time and that, we went out and talked to investors about raising a Series B, and I was like, hey, we want to go raise a Series B. This is our numbers. And they were like, you're fucked. And I was like, I'm going to go tell the team that we're fucked. And hopefully if we spend 9 months, Kleiner was kind enough to give us a $2 million bridge, though at a 4x liquidation preference. So we had basically 9 months was sort of what I gave ourselves. And I was like, we're going to spend 9 months really trying to make this thing grow.
Yeah.
And we just built so much stuff. We built, literally I made a list of all the things we built. We shipped a major feature a week. We were like, it was honestly a great time because we were having, even though we were almost screwed, it was like, we're a family, we're building all this stuff. It was super fun. It was like the singular focus. I didn't have to worry about anything else. I was just going. And it felt like an out-of-body experience. And, but I think in hindsight, I wish I hadn't done that. And part of it was we didn't have time. But I wish we had taken a step back and said, we're putting lipstick on a pig at this point. None of these things is really going to change the direction of the product. Otherwise, they would have a long period of time ago. There's nothing new about what we're doing. But just like I said, the market is going to determine most of your growth. I think we sort of intrinsically knew creators, slow market, really difficult to monetize. Long tail is very small and brutally expensive to support via, customer support, et cetera. I wish we had taken a step back and been like, okay, market, we figured it out. Most people would say we had product market fit. And if we had product market fit, all these other things. That's the hardest thing about doing a startup, people say, right? Besides maybe hiring people.
I think it's interesting because you had product market fit while creating a new category. So you had to both define what is a creator, who are we selling to, and find product market fit when it was still very early.
Totally. And so we didn't know, when we started hitting some of those ceilings on our numbers and we'd have a flat month or something, and we'd be like, is this because the sort of the creator market is sort of, still figuring itself out and doing that? And I think it was and still continues to grow. When we had me working 4 hours a week, we were still growing. Literally just no features, no shipments, basically me answering support emails, basically. It was great. But I think we did have product market fit, but what we didn't have was a big market, So in that market, I think we had saturation. We were doing great. Creators loved us. They were confused why we weren't able to raise money. When the layoffs happened, they all freaked out. and they didn't really understand it, and they hated VCs. But I'm like, no, it's not there. We signed up for this journey, right? Like when we raise money, like don't blame the VCs. Like I can take agency and blame for that, if there is that to be taken. But I really wish we went back and we're like, okay, what is the next market? Like, what can we do? Maybe we should have built Patreon, a few months ago, or maybe we should have thought more about, okay, like building an audience. Let's go figure out how to do that at scale and build something more like a ConvertKit or something like that, which is doing pretty well. But again, hindsight 2020. It's really difficult in the moment when you're doing those things. But I think that's sort of like the number one insight. And the thing that I tell everyone, I'd like go through every single feature we shipped, and people are honestly, and then I show, I think that part in the essay like really like blew people's minds a little bit, because they're like, 16 hours a day and then 4 hours a week, 20 people in the office, 5 and then 1, and then just the thing just kept going. And that's the beauty of software.
Yeah.
And it's also like, it's sort of like this, I had this like existential crisis when I did that. And I was like, this is great, because it's going to be a great line in the essay. And it sucks because I basically have to admit to everybody that I did nothing. Like I was useless in this time, and I felt like I almost like didn't want to say that, because I'm like, I don't want people to think like we were just stupid or we were building the wrong stuff. And luckily I don't think people got that, but it was a fear. And I think if I went back and was like, okay, new market, I think, earlier in the thing I say like raising money is like double or nothing. You're kind of like extending your ante and you're hoping that the thing works eventually. And for a few companies it does, and it's great. And sometimes, or a lot of the time, it doesn't. And the double or nothing also applies to the market. It's like, great, you figured out product market fit. It got you to this point. It gave you a brand. It gave you a team. What's the next market? Is it double what we're doing now? What's the next market after that? What's the next market after that? And Facebook, did that, right? They were college students, and then they were like more than that, high school, et cetera. And but maybe not, right? Like maybe Facebook would have been like, oh, actually we're like, no one else wants to use this. It's just Ivy League schools. You never know. And so that there's kind of, I wish I like had more of a thing in my head that's like, hey, we didn't grow this much in the last 6 months. Is that because we screwed up in a way that we can fix, or because we need to go to a new market? We've capped out on this specific thing. So.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. We're excited to have you in San Francisco. I think now is probably a good time to switch over to some questions from the audience.
Awesome.
Does anyone want to go first?
So for the creators, is your best performing creators people who already have an audience and bring that to your platform, or for people who can people build an audience from nothing and do well? In your experience, what have you seen?
Yeah, currently it's mostly people that have audiences already, and part of it is because like selling a product requires so much knowledge and know-how and a commitment to selling products. One of the best products that's come out in the last like 3 or 4 months on Gumroad is Refactoring UI, which is a book about like becoming a better designer focused on engineers. It's a phenomenal, but it's not just like, oh, I'm gonna write a book. It's like a lot of work went into it. It's crazy how much they put into that thing, just like the whole magic thing. It's just a ton of work. And if you want to be successful, you have to do that. You have to make like a super high quality product, but then you also have to build an audience, share with them, build that trust and credibility. And I really think of kind of like with the essay that I wrote, a lot of it I think was like pent up appreciation. It was like they're not sharing the article just to share the article, but because like they're like, wow, this thing that you did was crazy. Like here's a cookie. And that's how selling products is. Often it's like give, ask, a sort of thing. I think Gary Vaynerchuk probably says something like that with more swear words in it.
Jab.
And but it's true. It's like you give basically everything. And frankly, when you see, and I can see all of it because I can go do some SQL. But in general, the amount of stuff that's sold on Gumroad is free on the internet. It's not necessarily like you're getting something that and that's true with a lot of stuff, especially with piracy. I mean, literally everything if you wanted, you could get for free. It's people are paying for, in economics, there's like different types of utility, right? And like one of them is like form utility, right? Spotify, you don't have to pay for. None of us have to pay for Spotify. We choose to do it for form utility, for convenience. And I think, and because we want to support artists or whatever. There are other reasons to do it. And I think just being aware of those things and understanding, like when you're selling a book, first of all, they can't see how good the book is when they buy it anyways, right? And so make sure that like the website's awesome, the pricing, you have tiers, The sort of the number one actionable thing I tell people is to price discriminate, like to have business class and first class tickets to your product. Just like when we were talking earlier about going up market and how so much of the money is up market, and it's a sexy story to say, oh, we're serving long tail creators, but if you don't go up market, what happened to Gumroad happened. Like it's very difficult to build a sustainable business that's trying to help people get paid if you're not working with, in the creative community, like the people at the top of the field. You're sort of like getting rid of the fat head, only focusing on the long tail. It's really hard. It's like the box office without Disney, which is Disney, I think, is 75% of the box office this year. It's hard to do that. And especially when you raise venture, it's kind of game over from the beginning. But I think it requires a lot of knowledge and in general, and so that's sort of, so much of that has to happen outside of Gumroad. It's very difficult to educate someone on. And it's like, I don't know, if I met someone in an hour, I can't really teach them how to fundraise. So much of it is just like living and breathing and figuring that stuff out, and just like, and then it's like, how do you know this? I don't know. I just know all this stuff about. It's hard to like. Here's people email me or DM me and they're like, hey, like I want to go raise money. What's the best resource? And I'm like, it's like so complicated. It's like you can learn the rules. Like you can learn the rules of basketball. It doesn't make you good at basketball. That's a thing that you learn over time. If I wrote this, people ask me, how do you have so many followers on Twitter? And it's like, well, I've been on Twitter for like a long time, And I think if you sort of like, I mean, Twitter doesn't allow this because they have no functionality, but if you were able to like see the follower graph, it probably looks a lot more boring. It's probably just like this, Like it looks crazy now, but it's just like this very slow thing, and like the numbers just slowly get bigger. The algorithm likes, treats you nicer over time, and things like that just happen. And there's no real cheats, I tried to do the math one time when somebody asked me about how many people I met with one-on-one in San Francisco when I was here. I lived here, for 6 years. Thousands of people, like I think I did the math. It was like 7,000 people. So it's like, that what does that mean in terms of engagement I get on Twitter, followers I have on Twitter, whatever. A lot of that is those people, right? And that took a long time. And if I wrote a book, sold a book, I'm going to go to those 7,000. I mean, I might not, I don't know who they are anymore, but those 7,000 people hopefully have some relationship with me. And like, they were like, hey, yeah, you bought me that coffee that one time and told me this thing. Yeah, I'll buy your book on Amazon or whatever, like that will happen. And it goes back to the family, the friends, it's like the community aspect, and they'll teach you, they'll help you do that. And like the best way to start a company is to be an early employee at a company. The best way to, I know so many YouTubers that like their job before they became a famous YouTuber was to edit a famous YouTuber's videos. Like there's no way to, osmosis is like such a powerful thing. I became such a better designer when I started working with designers at Gumroad, better engineer, better CEO, better teammate, because that is osmosis. It's like free, osmosis 8 hours a day plus, unbeatable.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for answering.
Sorry, that was a long answer.
I liked it.
Hey, thanks for doing this. This is awesome. Shameless plug. If you need a better tool to create Twitter threads, I'm actually launching something on Product Hunt this Monday.
What's it called?
It's called Stream.
Stream? What's the URL?
I don't know how to share it.
Just tell me.
Oh, it's Stream with 4 E's.
See, this is why I did Gumroad.
I picked it up yesterday, so I need to figure it out better.
Okay, cool.
So, wait, so the question that I want to ask you was, what do you think is one of the biggest motivators for your creators to like keep working on something even though they're not getting a lot of revenue initially?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's because they want to do, like they need to do this thing, And I think there's so many. I think we really struggled with trying to, in the early days, convince people to use Gumroad and to pursue this thing. And I realized over time, sales is not about, in my opinion, sales is not about convincing, something I would never say on Twitter, in my opinion. Retweets would tank. But in general, like, sales, I think, is the process of educating somebody on a thing that they already know they want to do. Trying to convince someone that they should do this thing is, possible, certainly, but very, very, very difficult. And so I learned that lesson pretty early, and we tried to focus on, like, we're not going to try to convince anybody they should be doing this. because we're dead in the water. If that, someone we can, they'll go to school, they'll do all, there's just so much investment that goes into them getting to that point, years potentially, and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're good not paying for. And so, we'll just be there when people are ready. And that's what SEO is, right? But sales is sort of the same thing. It's all about like finding the people. It's like recruiting. It's like finding the people that are ready. The guards are already down. They're already thinking about the next thing. Trying to convince someone to leave a company is impossible.
Retention for the creator.
Yeah. Honestly, we did a lot. We invested a lot. It was very expensive. And I think I personally failed to spend more time outside the product. And if I did that, if I was more involved, it felt very secondary to the product, and I think that was bad. But we did try it, and we had an amazing team doing it, and we did a lot of cool events and content and videos with all these like big people, and it was really hard to quantify, and I don't think it worked. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is I think the size of the brand has to be pretty large, I think, to sort of like really glean value from a lot of that stuff, like a Shopify sort of scale. And because then you can really, so your bottleneck becomes like we can actually, like, it is valuable to convince people that they should be doing something like this. And then also just like we felt that like just the content, us doing the content was no different from anybody else doing the content in many ways. And like when someone wants to learn how to shoot a video, like we can help people do that, but they can also just like YouTube it and like get a better thing. And so I think our strategy going forward is to like, instead of trying to create the content, like guess what? We have 40,000 content creators. Like let's just get them to do it, pay them to do it. And then their audience, and that is the viral growth loop, is there are so many people that it's almost like an MLM scheme or something. There's so many people that are selling content on Gumroad that have to do with like, how do you, I mean, I used to have a distaste around this whole make money online thing because it felt really scammy. Like all you're doing to make money online is telling people how to make money online, teaching people how to make money online. And it's like, it's kind of a Ponzi scheme. But then you realize like, that's what I'm doing. Like that turns out like, that's what we're all doing. We're trying to help people make money on the internet. Like that's not that, hopefully it's not a Ponzi scheme. It kind of is, but whatever. We're all in a bubble. That bubble is humanity. And
One more question.
yeah. I'll end. Yeah, I can keep talking forever. Did you explore marketplaces at all? Yeah. So the question is, did you explore marketplaces at all? And he's good. Good question. Yes. So that was one of our sort of like Hail Marys in that sort of 9 month, like literally September, where like we're gonna build a marketplace. I never wanted to do it. That was one of my sacred cows that I should have slaughtered a long time ago, and we built this thing called Gumroad Discover that was like a really rough implementation because like we were going to run out of money in October and it was September, we built the whole thing and shipped it in 4 weeks. It was great. But it really didn't work, partly because it was like not fundamental. It just felt thrown on, and it worked in a sense, like it was incremental. It was great. We like got, some additional like 3 or 4 growth percentage points sort of that month, but it wasn't thought through enough. It wasn't user researched. It wasn't core to the thing. And that's like what I'm doing now is like literally right now, the thing I'm working on is how do we get the Discover product integral to the experience, make it part of using Gumroad so that when someone is going through the process of using Gumroad, they're learning about the marketplace, because if they're not doing that, we don't believe in it, and we should just delete the feature. We should just get rid of it entirely. And we did that actually, like when I went through that sort of like depressive state and we got profitable and we started building stuff again and it was still just me, the first thing I did was like figure out what features don't people actually use, and then just went through and like red diff, just like deleted them all. Deleted the specs. Awesome. It was just like, we're going to start sort of from scratch again. Like the way I think of Gumroad now is like, I didn't start Gumroad. It's like some other dude started Gumroad and then like gave me the business after committing suicide. And now I run Gumroad. It's a gift to me. None of those sacred cows are mine. They're all that person's. And I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want with it. And it was, and that sort of, it's just kind of a joke, but it's probably truer than you might think. Like that framework really helps me think about like the way that my relationship with Gumroad, which is very different from $1 billion company, venture backed, all that sort of stuff.
I think that's a really helpful framing as well. And I think that you've delivered on that on multiple levels, like whether it's your writing, whether it's your tweeting. I think like your level of transparency and like honesty when it comes to both building Gumroad and like your personal journey is really impressive. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, making the trip all the way back to San Francisco. How can we stay in touch with you? Like, what's the best way for us to continue to learn more about Gumroad and the things that you're working on?
Yeah, the best place is Twitter. So my handle is @SHL, which I like to consider like the Web 2.0 version of my name. You can follow me there, which is frankly, yeah, like the best place to follow me, and really the only place. I think you can like follow my newsletter. I promise basically no updates on the newsletter. It's like a blog, but you know when you visit a blog and like this is why I never want to blog, is because the last post is like 4 years ago, and it's a post that's like, I'm going to start blogging again, and you're like, I've seen that that's why I love Medium. There's no expectation or any of that sort of stuff. But yeah, Twitter is the best place, and you can always DM me on there, send me an email, sahil@gumroad.com, follow my newsletter on my website.
Awesome.
Talk to me in person after this.
Yeah, sounds
very
good.
effective.
Yeah, IRL.
I might not respond to your email, but it would be really weird if I didn't respond to you talking to me in person.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks again to Hikari and to the Omneki team for having us. We'll be around to answer some questions, and thanks again for coming.
Well, thanks for having me.